So you state often that it is deglobalization rather than globalization we have to fear. The global economic crisis and its consequences has triggered a rise of protectionist, tribalist and racist parties, especially in Europe but across the world. What role can you see cultural diplomacy playing in countering this phenomenon?
Well, I think if cultural diplomacy is about letting people understand and respect each other, it has an important role. Essentially, if you can get some kids who can talk to each other and people who can talk to each other, they'll find they've got a lot more in common than they think. And this is what's happening. It's happening anyway. Kids are doing it. And young people and old people are now talking to each other in ways that was unimaginable in my parents' time.
Okay. During your time as the director of the World Trade Organization, you gave particular attention to helping poor countries participate in the multilateral trading system. Since you left, do you think this has kept going on?
I think in the main it has, but the negotiations are stalled. I went out of my way to ensure that the agenda was based on, in the main, development issues. Mind you, trade is development, but particularly in agriculture. And so for the Africans and the Latins, this was a key thing. And, you have a lot of countries that can't afford to have embassies in Geneva. Small countries. So we set up systems to help them, put them online, flew their ministers to meetings. A lot of small countries haven't got an ambassador, haven't got the time to read the papers, so give them news bulletins. Small countries frequently don't have the resources to take legal cases, so we set up a fund to assist them. All this was confidence building too. But the real deal is yet to be struck, and negotiations are painfully slow. No negotiations ever finished on time. No negotiations have ever totally failed, and no negotiations never failed to press because it's not gone far enough. So it's still work in progress.
Okay. So globalization has a Western outlook. With the economic rise of China and India, you think that the West needs to give more room to sort of Eastern, so to speak, politics and philosophy?
I don't quite know what you mean. The East is going to make its own space. It doesn't need permission from rich white countries. It'll do it, and they are doing it. The question is it going to be done in a multilateral framework where the rule of law prevails? And the absence of making decisions at Doha round means there's bilateral and regional deals breaking out. The world isn't going to change. It has. There's probably 1 million Chinese now working in Africa. Now, my figures are about 6 months out of date, so it's probably 1.5 million. And this is happening. Now, the question is, can we handle these things inside a framework of legal understandings which are disputable, where you can have disputes on difference, or are we going to allow the jungle to prevail? That's up to us. We have it within us to fix this thing.
Okay. So the name of our event is partly inspired to the name of your book, A World Without Walls. In relation to this concept, by looking at it from a different perspective, in dealing with terrorism and extremists who want to sort of build barriers, how can we deal with them, and can trade help in that?
Well, the world without walls is not a world without rules, values, standards and agreements and law and habits and decency. A free market without values, rules, agreements, understandings, habits and decency is not a free market. It's a black market. So globalisation has to be managed through rules, and it is in the main, because most trade is carried out under the umbrella of the World Trade Organization and other standards and rules. You've got to believe that development, education, and drives up better results, and that poverty is a breeding ground for extremists. I believe that. There is no secret that most extremists and bad people find sanctuary in closed economies and dangerous places, because that's where they prosper. Although it is a curious thing that I was reading some evidence that a lot of the suicide bombers and a lot of the leadership of the extreme terrorist groups are not poorly educated, are highly educated. This has been true of the treason of the intellectuals throughout history, that a lot of serious so-called intellectuals have misled working class people into all sorts of cul-de-sacs, fascism, Marxism, and some of the Islamic fascism that's existing. So, but you have to believe that rising living standards, the emancipation of women, freedom from fear, freedom of religion, freedom from religion, will squeeze out a lot of the extremists. I think it will. These great changes in history, French Revolution, the October Revolution in Russia, the Maoist Revolution, I doubt if they would have been successful had working people, had there been employment, had there been hope and progress, had there been social confidence that the world. I think most people support violence unless they have to. There have been occasions in history it's not been true, but normally it's true. So yeah, I believe trade is a generator of wealth and opportunity, but it's only one thing. Trade on its own, without regulations, rules and standards, is black market. There are places where there's buckets of trade, not transparent, corrupt.
Okay. And do you think we're with the world without walls concept, do you think we're going the right way about this? Or could this build walls between the rich and the poor?
Look, World Without Walls is a book label and a conference label. There'll always be certain kinds of rules and regulations. When they become a maze, they're costly, reactionary, and work against the interests of all. But you can prove that this works, all the evidence is, all boats rise. Being poor now, in many countries, is where the middle class were 50 years ago. Poor people in my country now do have a car, do have a television, do have a telephone, do have a freezer. My grandmother had none of those things. This is not a bad thing. This is progress, because we don't want to live like that anymore. So, because the definition of poverty is what is 40% the average wage, there must always be 40%. But there is desperate things that happen in the suburbs, and there is loneliness, and there are too many men who use their fists and fathers who won't stay home and look after their kids. There are too many corrupt politicians and lazy school teachers, and we do have to toughen up. But this is not all the fault of democratic capitalism or of trade. I mean, when you go to poor countries, in my country, the kids won't go to school. When you go to Africa, it's the teachers who won't go to school. The kids turn up and somehow they get a clean white shirt. How do they do it? They want to learn. And it's the systems that let these kids down. The kids are okay. They get it. And the poor kids get it in the main. But if fathers won't stay at home, if mothers are full of drugs and fathers are full of booze and there's no books in the house, of course these kids are going to have it hard, whether it's in my country or any other country. And trade and business is just one part of it.
Okay.
That's not what you expected.
That's all.
Just one. Yep. I just wanted to interject one thing. You talked about your grandmother. You talked about your grandmother, and you said, well, she didn't have a refrigerator, a car, a cell phone, but she also did not have a hole in the ozone layer. So, I mean, how do we reconcile that? I mean, what really is progress?
Well, I think what is progress can be measured by life.
In terms of your grandmother.
I think life expectancy. How many babies are born and live? Our grandparents had 8 or 9 kids because 3 or 4 of them would die, and there was no welfare system to support them, and women didn't work in the workforce. That has, in the majority, changed for most people in most countries. What are the side effects of it? Well, is environmental damage. But here's the thing. The River Rhine, the River Thames, the Great Lakes of America are cleaner now than what they were in our grandparents' time. We've actually made some progress. You can fish in the Thames. The Great Lakes were catching fire in America in the 50s and 60s. The Thames was so filthy that Queen Victoria's husband died of typhoid. Now, Prince Albert died of typhoid. People don't die of typhoid if you use a 25-cent antibiotic. Lord Rothschild died of some disease that cost about 4 cents to fix. So in 1900, life expectancy was 50. Now in the West, life expectancy will be 100 of kids born now. And this creates problems. We now have in our society 60-year-olds looking after 80-year-olds. Now here's the bad news for you. When you're 80, you're going to be looking after your 105-year-old parents. It's, it's just bad. I think it's good. Look forward to it.
We'll agree it's a very good thing.
And the population's triangles change. Because when you set up the welfare state, my country was one of the first in the 1880s, the pensions covered 3% of the people. Now it covers 30%. So we take the age from 60 to 65. And it'll still cover 20%. Now here's the other thing. Not only are you going to have to look after your 105-year-old parents, you probably won't get a pension till you're 80 either.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a bad news. Okay, so thanks for...
because the population triangles change. And so that you live longer, you're going to have to work longer. Ours was the first social security after Bismarck. Bismarck had the first social security system. Right? New Zealand was the second. We were the first to give women the vote. Okay? At that point, it covers 3% of the people, and it covers them for about 18 months of their lives. 100 years later, 150 years later, it's what? It covers people for 30 years and covers 40% of the population. Is this progress? Well, I think living longer is an important thing.
Definitely.
Not that I'm frightened of meeting our maker. This is your question, what is important? Also, music and art's important. But here's the thing. 40 years ago, 50 years, 60, when your great-great-grandparents decided to go to live in America or come and live in Australia or New Zealand, they never thought that they would never see their folk again. They thought they'd never listen to an opera again. They were going to a new world. Now you can download all this music. Who's that clever American who invented the record? He thought it would be for legal work. He didn't realise it would be for music. When he invented the telephone, Edison, he didn't think it would be for ordinary people to talk to their aunties and mothers and girlfriends. He thought it was going to be a legal device. So I think this improves. People can sit in atolls in the Pacific, only 2,000 people in the country, and listen to the operas, listen to the music. This is great. Get the best medicine that some German scientist has invented, then overcharges us for. At least we got the medicine. So I think overwhelmingly it's good. And here's something you don't like to hear. There are more moderate forests now than there were 20 years ago. We're replanting in moderate regions. Now we can handle many of these problems the world's facing. It's not all gloom and doom. Your rivers are cleaner now in Germany than they were 50 years ago. This is good. We're learning. Slowly. Takes a while. Okay, that's it?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay. We've talked too much.
Thank you so much for your time, Mr.
That was the
Thank
most
you.
animated.
Well, see, you're an American, you're not European. The Europeans are getting very depressed and, things are bad. Get up and go. Take charge of it. Get over it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, good to see you, Matt.
Yeah.
It's New World versus Old World.
It's a
Yeah.
cool. Well, I'm between both. I'm 62.